Europe is currently in the midst of an egg crisis after Belgian and Dutch egg farms were provided with illegal treatments for their chickens. Millions of eggs have been removed from supermarket shelves. It is feared the contamination is widespread and may have lasted for more than a year. Meanwhile, as the investigation continues, Germany is demanding answers about why the EU's International Food Safety Alert System did not provide a timely alarm about the impending problems. To discuss this crisis and the wider issues of food safety, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by William Spears, current affairs commentator, Liu Baocheng, director of the Center for International Business Ethics, University of International Business and Economics, and Peter K. Barrick, food safety expert from World Health Organization. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we start, let's look at this.
In Europe, it's a diet staple, but millions of eggs have been destroyed after some tested positive for a toxic insecticide called fipronil. Fresh eggs guaranteed to be safe are now on store shelves. Any fear going to the grocery store, buying some eggs, and eating them?
No, not at all.
No, I'm not worried because I think people make a very big deal about it.
Still though, hundreds of poultry farms in Belgium and the Netherlands have been ordered closed as investigations progress into how the insecticide ended up in the human food chain. Exported contaminated eggs were also recalled in Germany, Switzerland, Sweden, France, and the UK. Belgian health officials now accuse their Dutch counterparts of knowing eggs were tainted as far back as November of last year.
When a country like the Netherlands, one of the biggest egg exporters in the world, doesn't exchange this type of information, that's a real issue.
Holland denies that and says back then there was no indication any eggs were unsafe. Meanwhile, Belgium is being accused of covering up it knew fipronil was used on poultry farms as early as the beginning of June, but didn't notify the EU until late July. Health officials, though, stressed the levels found in affected eggs were low, and eggs were recalled only as a precaution.
Given the concentrations found in current tests, no effects are expected on people's health as long as a normal amount of eggs are consumed.
And those words of reassurance are enough for most Europeans to continue eating eggs.
Every year there is something in our food that is not good. 5 years ago, then it's the meat. Then it's the chickens, then it's the fish from the North Sea that is not good, and now it's the eggs. I eat them. I like eggs.
As Belgium and the Netherlands have their back and forth, European Union leaders say now is not the time to play the blame game. EU leaders say as both countries investigate how the insecticide ended up onto egg farms, it's time for transparency and for the two countries to work together. Kevin Uzbek, CGTN, Brussels.
Now, the blame game aside, Mr. Spears and Mr. Liu Baocheng, it seems the public opinion is quite divided as to how serious the contamination has been for the consumers. With some argue strongly this is a very serious event. Particularly, it will deliver very harmful effects for young people and babies in particular. Others would argue, however, they would not take it very seriously. They say unless you eat an enormous amount of such contaminated eggs, it won't be very harmful for your health. What's your opinion?
Well, my opinion is that in reality, because we have a food standardization in the UK and food standards throughout Europe, the problem has been the illegal putting in of the insecticide, which is not good without anyone knowing. And as you say, it's not a big problem, not health-wise. For example, a 65-kilo person can actually eat 7 eggs a day, not worry about it. A child can eat 2 eggs a day, it's still no problem. So really it's the reality of not having this continuity and transparency of the process.
And your concerns?
Well, there is no immediate impact on the human health, but the whole process, and particularly the accused, the adultery of the cleaning agent is really very much a signal to alert people of the mismanagement and even ill intention that is really involved. And now, you know, in 2013 there was a horse meat issue, and now, you know, it really alerts the European the food management system whether they have loopholes to obstruct, so that they will prevent further happening in other type of food.
What do you think of the issue of legality for some of those who might be held responsible?
Well, I think the good thing about Europe, it has really good, transparent food quality systems all through Europe, and people doing this illegal addition of the insecticide to the original insecticide just throws some people into confusion and lack of confidence in the system. So that's the biggest problem for me. So I think that reality, they really need to be taken to the task on this, to set an example for other people.
I think that also brings to the light of the coordination effort between different countries of EU after the integration, because the fact that Belgium and Netherlands are trading accusations, well, shows that there is not only coordination issue but also transparency issue, and there is also accusedly the local protectionism, etc., etc. So that's also a quite challenge, particularly during the heavy event where the integration of Europe is being challenged by countries who pulled out and now who are ready to put out. So this really a test of how the entire EU system are really responding to certain events.
To hear more first-hand account about what's going on in European Union and perhaps the whole of Europe, let me go to Mr. Peter van Embarek. He is a food safety expert from World Health Organization. He is on satellite. Hello. Hello, Peter.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening. This is Ray. I'm the
Good
moderator.
evening. Can you
now,
hear me?
what will happen to the firms that supplied the toxic substance for so blatantly and illegally endangering the safety of the public, potentially throughout all of Europe?
This is what the ongoing investigation will identify and tell us. Clearly, there are different responsibilities. We have to look at what happened with the development, processing, and use of this contaminated disinfectant, who was responsible for that. And then, of course, there are the wider responsibility of food producers, to what extent they have applied the necessary control of the eggs they were using in their processes. So there will be a whole range of investigations that will define and identify the different responsibilities of the different players in this event.
Now, Peter, how toxic is the insecticide called fipronil?
Fipronil is an insecticide that is used for a whole range of insects in homes and in the environments, and also used as an insecticide on pets and on certain seeds used in agriculture. But in many countries, including the European Union, it's not allowed to be used during the processing and raising of animals that are used for food. And therefore, in this particular case we are looking, we have seen an illegal use of this insecticide.
So there's clearly a violation of the law. According to what we know so far, Peter, Belgium may have been aware of the problem in early June, and the Netherlands allegedly may have known about it since November last year. Why has it taken so long to make this issue public?
This is the question that everybody is currently asking, and again we have to wait until the current investigations are being conducted to better understand what happened and why this delay happened. But clearly, seen from a consumer point of view, seen from the point of view, this is clearly a problem. But we will see what the investigation will tell us.
Belgium officials have admitted failing to trigger the EU's international food safety alert system, but claimed that this was because of a fraud inquiry. The German agriculture minister is demanding, Peter, they are demanding answers from the EU. So what explanation can there be?
Again, we will have to wait until the explanation comes from the person in in the core of this event in Belgium and the Netherlands and other countries involved. But clearly, usually what happens when you have this type of event is that once a contamination is detected, this is immediately reported in Europe through the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed, and at the international level through the InfoSan network, which is the WHO FAO international network for food safety authorities of all the world. So through these networks, we spread and share the information with all the responsible national agencies who can then take action on the ground. They can initiate the recalls of contaminated products. They can share information about contaminated lots and shipments, etc., to quickly limit the public health impact and trade impact of these type of events.
Thank you so much, Peter. I will go back to you in a few minutes. But Mr. Spears and Professor Liu, what do you think of his comments on the coordination and the joint efforts to eliminate the dangers?
Well, personally, I think that any effort to have more joined-up thinking and joined-up action is a good thing. I know that Europe's going through a transitional period at the moment, yeah, so if they can actually get it together, and with England Brexiting as well, remember that we all have our own food safety systems, and they all need to interact with each other at the end of the day, because when we trade together, we need to know we're eating safe food together.
And do you think this scandal may have been blown out of proportion with the extensive media coverage? This is just an exaggeration.
Well, I think for any headline news, there has to be some fuse behind it. So I think one is this integrating force of EU really are really fueling this type of fear and anger even. And now the lack of response or the delayed, procrastinated response is also triggering public anger, and also because it is the special nature of the food itself, because everyone can be impacted. And another very strong reason is that now it is spreading into many countries, now up to 20 countries. So people with different expectation, with different culture, and also with different level of knowledge, and think about food safety, so they will get really restless about this one. So therefore, there is no really a small issue here. So it's not only the health issue, but now it turned out to be a political issue.
People point their fingers to two countries. One is Belgium, the other the Netherlands. The Netherlands is Europe's biggest egg producer and one of the largest exporters of eggs and egg products in the world. This egg scandal will clearly cause damage to the credibility of its egg products, possibly even the entire agriculture industry. Do you share our concerns about the future of the Netherlands agriculture industry?
No, I think it's consumer confidence is the biggest problem here. The Dutch government have been very good, apart from perhaps not telling us earlier. It is the supplier and the distributor who have created the problem. So I think we should have faith in the governments. We should have faith in the negotiators getting to the core of this problem, in my opinion.
Well, I think much really depend on the truth after the investigation. If there is a really active concealment of such an issue by the Dutch authority, so that could be an entirely different issue, though.
Well, I agree, but also we must remember we're going through a very, very difficult time. And what about the poor farmers who have lost their livelihoods, and the consumers who have lost their abilities to eat eggs? Remember, in the UK we have the British Lion stamp, which follows everything through from the poultry right to the shop. So it's a whole traceability program. And if the rest of Europe could have this sort of program, it would be very, very useful.
Yeah, and I think, how do they deal with the aftermath? So that's also a very interesting issue. Like the bird flu issue in 2015 in the United States, that's one government, the federal government, have the emergency budget to deal with the farmers. But now, whether they have a coordinated efforts on the entire EU or the individual country who are there to compensate certain victimized farmers. So that's also quite a test to how EU is really there to get coordinated.
Do you see any legal loopholes? Do you think the current existing regulations and laws need to be improved?
I think it's a question of actually people working with the law, with the regulations. It's obvious in this case that people did not work with the regulations and created the problem. So if you remember, many years ago we had a salmonella problem in the UK, and time is a great healer. People get very worried. They get, the scandal was bad for about 6 months. And then, of course, everything settled down again. So I do hope the poultry producers in Europe, especially in Holland and Belgium, regain that confidence in consumers so they can get back to business again.
Right. A few years ago, if we can review, we had the scandal of mad cow disease. So most of those affected animals, I believe, must have been slaughtered. So what was the response from the animal protection organizations?
Well, they are those animals actually the victims of the human deliberation or human negligence. So, instead of slaughter, they call it anthorize. So, or euthanize. So unluckily, but that's why they really, by American definition, they clearly, draw a clear line between animal versus poultry. So poultry are there to be, to be treated very differently. So therefore, animal rights are not there to play much of the role.
But I think animal rights are so important. For example, in Ireland, the farmers actually play music to their animals, to the cows, to create more productivity. And I think with poultry as well, if you look after your poultry in a more humane manner, if you wish, I think there'd be better productivity as well.
Obviously, our discussion is going deeper. Let me go back to Peter for his comments on the animal rights and the media response in generating the current panic. Hello, Peter, what can we hear from you?
Yes, of course, each time we have these type of events, it starts a lot of discussions about our modern food production system, about what can be improved. Remember that Europe has probably one of the most robust and solid food safety system in the world. And this system was built out of a series of food safety crises back in the 90s, as you remember. And of course, each time we have a crisis, it's always an opportunity to improve the systems. None of our systems are perfect. None of our food safety system can 100% ensure the safety of our food, but they are continuously being improved, and at least the one in Europe is currently a very solid one. And we are seeing already now, and that's of course something that you don't see in the media, you don't see among the public, but there is a tremendous amount of work being done to share information, to facilitate the recall of these eggs, to identify where they have been going, in which products, in which processes. So there are a tremendous amount of work that is currently being done to reduce the impact of this event.
Now, Peter, have you switched on the global alert system to avoid having the spillover effect from European Union to other parts of the world?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we have an international network that links all the national food safety authorities in the world, the InfoSan network. And this is being used each time we have this type of events, in particular to share rapid information between national authorities, so they have at hand all the information, all the data they need to take action in their countries on, for example, imported products that need to be recalled or etc. So this network is being activated and used every time we have this type of events.
Common sense says loud and clear that we shouldn't have strong doubts about the health standards or standards for the drug and food in a place like the European Union. However, I believe, and observers may share my concern, that the World Health Organization can do more to alert people to food hazards or the issue of food safety from the current scandal about fipronil. So what can you do at this moment to let the rest of the world feel relieved?
We have, for example, as early as yesterday, the European Union, the European Commission had shared with the InfoSan network members, that means with all the national food safety in the world, concise notes summarizing events and explaining exactly what has happened and the current status of the investigation. And this is being updated regularly, so all the national agencies in the world are being kept informed about the developments of the investigation, and each time there is a discovery of a new distribution channel of some of these eggs, this is communicated to these national authorities. So the world is kept abreast, is kept informed constantly of the development of an event like this one.
The Chinese media responded very quickly to the current scandal in Europe. And one of the reasons, I believe, is that a few years ago we had the scandal of milk powder, and babies, kids, toddlers tend to be the first casualty. Now, the other issue in China is corruption. Since high-ranking government officials who work for the administration of food and drug were singled out and they were punished, they were brought to justice. So many of the Chinese consumers have expressed their concerns about food safety. What can you tell us? What are your thoughts about the Chinese market and what should be done by the Chinese authorities after we have learned so much from what you went through, Peter?
I think China has made tremendous efforts in improving its system over the last 10-15 years with developing and approving and putting in place a new modern food safety law, for example, that has already been revised several times, by revising and developing new food standards, by starting to set up the capacity to do advanced risk assessment, for example. So there is a lot of things that have been done since the melamine crisis and other past crises. But as in Europe and as the other part of the world, this is work in progress. And we are improving these systems, we're improving the capacity to enforce these regulation and standard, and that is often the most difficult part, is how you can have the most beautiful, the most adapted and proper standards and so on, but it's enforcement, their enforcement, and how they're put in place and used and applied by the industry, by the food producers, by the farmers, and controlled by the food inspectors and so on, is a tremendous piece of work, and that is going to take time. Again, we don't have perfect systems in place. We can only attempt to improve them. And of course, in that process, all the players have, one way or the other, a role to play. Consumers have also a role to play in terms of making informed choices about what they are buying, about avoiding themselves to put themselves at risk when they are preparing food at home. But of course, the producers of the food have the ultimate responsibility for.
Thank you so much, Peter, for being with us.
They are the one responsible.
Thanks a lot. Now, Mr. Spears and Mr. Liu, are you more confident about the transparency, both the Drug and Food Administration as well as the media, regarding food safety after we have learned the bitter lessons the hardest way from, for example, SARS back in 2003 and the chicken flu?
Well, my own feeling is things are changing a great deal in China. When I was here first in 2008, we had the melamine scandal with the milk, and lessons have been learned from that. And I think it's going to gradually improve, and President Xi recently has focusing on agriculture to improve the processes and the production will make a big difference to China, in my opinion.
Well, I think the situation is far more complex in China. For example, Sanlu actually never violated the food standard, even by the time they went bankrupt, because the food standard was set with the 40 type of terms. So therefore, melanin was sort of not really identified as the pollutant in that regard. And number two is that the contamination has been so deliberate and so prevalent, and almost virtually all the major milk companies were doing that job. Yes, China has really improved, but there are a lot of other more issues. And one particular issue is that there has been a pyramid of buying pattern in China. You know, the people in Beijing and in Shanghai, they are as savvy as people in Europe and in North America, but people in the township, in the local villages, they expect to be to have really, first of all, the low price products, and therefore that really, make the suppliers more sustainable, more susceptible to lower their grades.
You know, many overseas observers who follow the development in Hong Kong may have politicized the protests. In fact, many tourists from the mainland went there to buy milk powder, and that has, of course, generated a lot of fury from the local consumers. And perhaps in other parts of the world, young Chinese parents were doing much the same to protect the health of their children. So do you think this general scenario has changed the demand and supply relationship in the food market somehow? Because we have such an enormous amount of tourists. Last year alone, for example, up to 120 million Chinese traveled to other parts of the world.
Indeed. I think it's important to remember that the most important thing for a family in China is the child. And to give the child quality food at a reasonable cost is what we should be aiming for. The big problem is quality comes at a price, because you have to police the supply chain, you have to ensure that everything's checked, and that costs money.
And do you think this is going to be a painful learning curve for not only the Food and Drug administrators, but also parents, the consumers, the supply and demand sides?
Well, actually, if you look at the past 5 years of the top concerns of the Chinese people, the food safety is always on the top of the number of the 10 top concerns. Mm-hmm. So it is not really being alleviated. And the other is that for the baby formula, still over 90% of the premium baby formula is occupied by the imported ones. It is not only import the powder, but also the packaged food overseas. If you really are there to package the imported powder in China, people will still lose trust. So the wound is not really healed so far.
Right. The growing public awareness about the health standards will prompt government to exercise better governance and to strengthen the rule of law. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.